yeah, I think we've got a good topic today, right? I think I sort of this idea of like talking about like scouting and trialing both players and coaches, because I think like different coaches take it differently, right? So I think having like a discussion where me and you sort of talk about it, and we sort of like think about like what we value when we look at players and coaches, and sort of like what we look at. I'm feeling we'll have definitely stuff in common, but hopefully we'll have a different point of views, which will be interesting, and hopefully it'll just help players in understanding what they need to get better at, or even coaches what they sort of need to get better at.
Yep. Yep. For sure. For sure. This
Okay.
will be fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is like, to be clear, this is your topic, your idea. I think this is a brilliant idea, and I'm really, really excited to kind of get started.
Well, should we just start right off the bat? Like,
Sure,
so
let's do it.
yeah, like, so what do you look for in players? You go first. You tell me.
Um, I think we had a really good question in my chat earlier, and I had another coach in trials,
Hmm.
Faffer, and he basically was asking like, what do you think is the most important key or ingredient for team success?
Hmm.
And my answer was very clearly player leadership.
Hmm.
Somebody who can step up, somebody who can not necessarily just like communicate, but somebody who really has the drive to do better, to make plans, to hustle, to grind, to do what needs to get done, to get it done. And I think that's something that you definitely especially need from at least one or two players,
Yeah.
right? Whether that's the shot calling or the communication or whatever, but something that you'd love to have with every player, is because it's so easy to stagnate, to lose motivation, to not improve, to not be able to step up when and where your team needs you. And I think like obviously there's like guidelines of like we want players that have good mechanics, that are relatively flexible, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But like the most important thing is I want players that are hungry and that want to actually be there and want to succeed.
Yeah.
Because I think like it's not just about like, okay, this team has a nice little skill ceiling here, like we could get better over the course of the season. It's also the fact that like uh, it affects how scrims go, how officials matches. Like we've seen a lot of teams in the past of like, oh, this roster's stacked, like they're going to do really well, and then it just doesn't happen. Like either it just like the personalities clash, or there's like a lack of leadership, or everyone looks like to be on different pages. And I think that is a huge factor. Like I think players that don't have like that leadership aspect and aren't hungry in that aspect, that generally that's where you see it, is when it starts to
Yeah.
affect people, is
No.
with that kind of thing.
I
And I think that was
totally
something
agree.
that like Zenith had the full write up of like how he put together Third Impact, and I think that was a big factor with what you guys did. Is like like that long trialing session that you guys did. And I'm sure you'll talk more about it, but like I think if you don't want to be there, if you don't want to get better, and you're not willing to like take what actions that are necessary to get better, I don't want you. Like I just don't want you to be there, and I like that's by far the most important thing. It's not the only thing, not even close, but for me it's the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I think I'm not gonna name names, but there's definitely teams I know in AU and EU contenders that are mechanically the best, but they don't get the best, if that makes sense. I'll say right now, like I like I'll use starting Impact as an example. Our teams literally like looked at us and were like, these guys are mechanically like incapable. Like a few of them are like really good, but like mechanically these guys aren't gonna be great. And like obviously we surprised them. And like so I think what really I've like sort of had this thing where I used to think like coachability and like game sense and adaptiveness. I used to think that's like the best thing ever. I used to think that's super important. And I'd rate that a bit more than mechanics. And then I look at different roles, just like how you said. Like I'd be like I need like one or two players that are like very big leaders, like people that can like shot call, calm, or even more when the team is looking down, they can like bring the team back up. Right when the team needs someone to hurdle around, right? They can like depend on this person, right? Normally someone with experience or someone just sort of has a voice, and I think that's like really important. But then I sort of like started thinking more about it. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's like that role can exist. But then I started thinking like, okay, like if I start thinking like logically, like what are like some of the best teams, like what actually stands out. In all honesty, in my opinion, in this day and age, I still think mechanics is something super important. So yes, I still want that leadership, but in all honesty, like I think mechanics is just so important now. Like because there's just this massive skill level difference just straight on mechanic wise between like top contenders and like bottom. So to me, like if you're mechanically strong, right, like that just puts you above so much more, right? And then to me, it's like, what cost does that mechanics come with, right? Because there are mechanically good players that have literally no understanding of the game at all, right? Ons is an example of a player who like didn't have good positioning at all. Like literally, like mechanics absolutely insane, so good he can literally just pop off. I remember like Ti scrimming shock, and literally like it got to the point where we were literally calling when Ons had grapple or not. because he was literally every time he grappled, he was getting a headshot, and we were just like, this is like ridiculous, right? I was on
Gosh.
King's Row. I'll like never like I'll always remember it. But yeah, so like I think there's always gonna be that cutoff point, right? But then the question is, what are you like, giving? Like, what's the con? Like, is the person's attitude not good? Is like the
Right.
attitude bad? Is like there's no communication, right? The person is
Mhm.
calm. It has no game sense or no adaptability, right? And I think that's the thing that I think recently I've sort of like realized that I don't want to rate mechanics is up there, right? But I need to rate those costs higher, right? And I think when you build teams and stuff, just like you, I agree. Have the two leaders. Definitely get people that are mechanically insanely strong, but make sure you take into those costs, those problems that can occur, right? Whether it's adaptability, whether it's game sense, communication, attitude. Like you need to make sure you sort of like take that into account. And I think that's something that I learned like recently as like doing some private coaching and like helping things, helping some teams on the side. I've noticed that that's like a very, very important
Yeah,
for me.
agreed. And I think there's an overlap between what the mechanics and like wanting to be there, the drive, because I say player leadership is definitely like that's a big one in of itself.
Yeah.
But the drive is almost more important than that wanting to be there. And you often find players with good mechanics are the players that also really want to succeed. Why? Because they're usually the players that are actually grinding, right? Like you look at American Tornado, and obviously everyone's like, "Oh, those players are just so good. No wonder they won." But every single one of those players hard grinds.
Yeah.
Every single one of those players hard grinds.
So much
They
comp.
want to be there. They want to win. They want to get better. And so like the mechanics are going to come. Obviously, they're going to come. I had a player like the backbone with sheer cold.
Mhm.
Phenomenal mechanics.
Oh, I think he's
And
insane.
he also really, really wanted to be there. Like he really wanted to succeed. And he had some attitude issues, more to do with like his mental and stuff. It wasn't like he was like flaming teammates and stuff. Just like we had to work really hard on that.
Yeah.
But we worked through it and we succeeded. And like he got better and better and better. And like overall, like third place finish right before I left. And like it worked out. And I can work around the attitude stuff. I can work around the mental and I can work around the game sense stuff because he wanted to be there. His mechanics were great because he wanted to be there. He wanted to get better. He put in the time over and over and over again. And Graythan as well. The hits gameplay, they both put in an insane amount of hours, especially the last 2 months before I left. Like they hard grinded and it paid off. And so I think like what you're saying is like the mechanical aspect of things. Yes, you need to be aware of the costs, but to me, it's almost like wanting to be there in mechanics. Those things overlap a lot because usually the players with really bad mechanics are the players that just aren't grinding.
Yep.
And if they're not grinding, that's a really big red flag.
Yeah. I think something else I'll use an example. I'm not gonna name teams that I've done it with, but I think homework is really important, and homework actually tells you a lot about players. The amount of times I've actually said, "Hey guys, I need you to go watch this VOD and like write something up and like actually send it to me," and people like I had to like literally like say it's due like before scrims the next week or something, and then like that day comes, right, and literally I'm just like, so who did their homework? I only have like 3 or 4 people. Why did you two not do it? And I'm just like I put my hands up. I'm just like, I'm not like here to like babysit you, right? Like, if you really want to get better and you really want to improve, this should be like something that you want to do. Like, I can't just be me, saying, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. And I'm here like, chasing behind you with like a mallet trying to say like, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? Like, there needs to be some like, you have like someone in my chat said, you have to want to do it. Like you yourself have to put the effort in. Like, and I think that relates to like anything in life too, if you think about it, right? Like when you work on a new job, and I'll actually use some analogies because I'm doing job hunting right now and I've had few interviews actually, but like if you go on a new job, right, and like you're working on some like environment or you're learning some coding language, for my instance, you've never heard of before, you're gonna have to learn it yourself. You're gonna have to put the work in, right? And like that's a skill and like something that like, yes, I understand Overwatch sort of has a younger audience, right? But like as you grow older, I'd say, right, like you sort of learn that like you have to like put a lot of work in if you want to be good. And
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think people have to be clear. Like, it's not like you're working like 14, 15 hours a day.
Oh, no.
You're,
Yeah,
like,
no.
unless you're a Korean player. But, this is a reasonable amount. And, like, not every team does homework. For example, I had bad interactions with a player, I won't say who, in the last 2 years, who was impossible to VOD review.
Yeah.
Hey, are you available to do this? Yeah, sure, let's do it. Okay, where are you? Nothing responds. We have scrims. No comment during scrims. I messaged him, hey, where were you? What's going on? Oh, well, sorry, I had something come up. Can we do tomorrow? I do tomorrow. Nothing then. And it ends up basically like I'm trying to VOD review with players once a week, and all of a sudden I'm VOD reviewing this player once every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And half the time I'm having to just make a video and send it to him and hope that he actually does it. It's like pulling teeth, and it's not like obviously, coincidentally, this player over the course of the season got worse and worse. They were one of the better players of the team clearly at the start of the season. By the end of the season, they were one of the worst players at the end of the season. And like, to me, like you said, whether it's the homework, the VOD reviews, whatever, like you can tell what players want to be there or not, and it gets to the point where it's like, okay, it's time to move on. Like, because it's like one of the things I always say, and I don't think this is 100% accurate, but it's a nice little catchphrase. It's like, I can coach a lot, but really the hardest thing for me to coach, and something that I don't really believe I can truly coach, is you wanting to be there.
Yeah.
I can make I can make the whole you being there more enjoyable and more fun, and like make it a fun training environment. But ultimately, if you just don't want it, then I can't coach that. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, no, and I think one thing that I think is really important, and it's something that I'll go into. I think the concept of being a hard worker, right? And I think there's a difference, like as you said before, right? Like 14 hours, right? That's a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
But how much time you put in, and like the quality you get out of that, right? Like I tell a lot of people, self VOD review, 15 minutes a day. Like, one topic,
Yes.
15 minutes a day, one map. I guarantee you, in a week, that one topic you do you'll be like way better at it. Right? Like it's like understanding what you need to do, and then just being consistent at it, and like taking that like that time limit, like that whatever time you're associating with it, and actually doing quality work, right? It's like studying or like anything, right? It's just being like actually like working what you need to do.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think like that's really, really, really important.
Agreed. Return on investment, like whatever you're doing, and making sure that's good work, and like that's kind of what a coach is there for. Hopefully, is that to help you do that, to make sure that your work is qualitative.
Yeah.
Or has quality, not qualitative.
What are your thoughts on like game sense? Like, cause I have this thoughts where like, in all honesty, in tier 2, I'll be honest, like the players I've worked with, about maybe like one on a team, I'd probably say 1 or 2 maybe have good game sense. And it like when I mean by game sense, I mean like understanding how to adapt, understanding like the general macro, and then understanding how your kit affects the macro.
Yeah, I think part of it is like game sense. Shoot. I think the big thing with game sense is like, obviously you have to be able to, like, you have to know your hero really, really well. Like, you have to know how your hero like actually interacts. For example, like you see a lot of main supports, I think, especially like a little less than a year ago, terrible brigs in terms of game sense and just mechanics, because they just didn't know the hero. Like, they didn't really know exactly how can this impact the battlefield, like what do I need to be looking for. So like, we can slow it down at 0.25 speed, and you go, okay, yeah, I could probably do that, and then I probably should have seen that here. But like, you need it up to speed, and so you need to like be comfortable with the hero, and so you need to grind that hero. So I think the first thing with game sense is to actually be good at the hero that you're playing. Otherwise, you're going to have no idea like what your job is and like what your impact is on the battlefield. And then on a macro like level of like, okay, the hero, my game sense still isn't there. Like, what's the deal? Again, you need to get in the habit of like actually thinking about what you said, because I think, what did you describe the game sense was? The very last thing you said?
Like micro to macro, right? So your kit into your macro. So whatever your stuff is, I call it micro.
So like
macro.
whatever impact you can have. Is that kind of what you said?
Yeah, basically.
And I think that's where you draw the line from the knowledge, and then you actually apply the knowledge, right? So I can know like what I do as a brig, but if I'm not like hyper focused and really, really putting in the effort, then it's not going to really work out. So I need to know my tools, right? I need to know like what this hero brings and what I need to be doing, and then I need to actually go in and apply it afterwards. I think the best way of like describing game sense would be like, you have a game plan. What can I do to make this game plan work, and/or what can I do to stop the enemy game plan from working? At least that's how it really matters when you actually get into scrims
at a high level.
Maybe it's a different story, right? And so when I see teams that like kind of look lost and they don't really know what they're doing, I'm either going to say, okay, this team has bad leadership. They don't have good planning. They're not really planning properly. They're not executing their plans. There's some sort of communication screw up that's leading these guys to just be all over the place, or this guy just sucks at his hero. Like, that's the simplest way of looking at it, in my opinion.
Yeah. So like my question, like going more into this, is when you're trialing players, right? Like, how much do you take this into account? Like being adaptive, like like sort of like understanding like their own role in the composition, right? Like normally when people do trials, at least TI and like a lot of other teams, you don't just trial one comp, right? You trial a bunch of different comps, and you sort of see like, hey, does this guy actually know like how to play his role in this comp, and like his role and how it affects like the team, right? Does he understand like, hey, the enemy team is like swapping to this, right? So like he needs to change like and do this, right? Like, so how high do you rate that when you're trialing players?
I mean, it definitely matters. It definitely matters. I don't think it's the most important thing. I think you can coach game sense on like on a macro level because, like again, I've coached people that they've never played Sombra before to a
Mhm.
decent Sombra level. Now I coached them, but then they had to go and put in the work. So obviously
Right.
that takes the grind mentality, right? Um, I think like again you're like okay, game sense is a composite of this player like being good at the hero, grinding the hero,
Mhm.
and it's them hustling, like really
Yeah.
trying their best, like make it like trying to figure out like what the game plan is. So I can forgive if a hero looks a little clunky on a hero if they're hustling in a trial,
Mhm.
right? They're like, okay, I'm really trying to figure out like what I'm supposed to be doing here. Like for example, like let's say I'm putting a guy in Sombra, he has no idea what he's doing. He's like, all right, guys, they're here, they're here. He's like trying to scout, he's like trying to call his hack targets, and he's like trying to set himself up right, and he's
Yeah.
just doing it awfully, but he's trying. You
Mhm.
know, I know that whatever time that we put into developing that player's game sense, that's going to stick,
Right.
right? So if that's going to stick, I'm more interested in that than the player that's like, okay, yeah, this player is well known because they have a good Sombra. Well, then what if Sombra's not meta? What if it's a hero that they're not as comfortable with, right?
Mhm.
Um, because like we've seen that, like we've seen that a lot, like in the last couple of months, is metas are they're sticky. In other words, they don't change super fast, but they do change.
Mhm.
And the biggest way to like turn yourself into a one trick team or have problems with that is have players that like their game sense doesn't really grow because they're not really hustling or they don't really have the drive. And to me, it just like keeps coming back to the drive. Like
Yeah.
that just overcomes a multitude of sins. And because like when we were like again, I'm going to bring up Backbone. Had no experience playing Sombra whatsoever, and but we went over it like what he needed to do during that like brief Winston Moira Reaper Sombra meta whatever, and he played like 3 or 4 hours of Sombra and ranked every single day over and over and over again. And by the end of like the actual officials, he was actually a really good Sombra. Um,
Yeah.
but he wasn't going to get to that like proper game sense level without the amount of work and without the guidance. And so
Yeah.
you have to look for players that are like you could describe game sense as like being aware of your surroundings, but also just game sense as like you're good at the hero and then you're trying to like actually complement like what the macro game plan is.
Yeah.
And if some players just don't hustle, then it's just not going to work.
So I have like a different perspective on this, and I changed it recently, and it's a
Okay.
bit different. And the reason why it's different is because I started working with KR players more and started
Okay.
talking to more KR players. And what I've sort of thought more of this now is I actually want players that actually know their micro to macro pretty well. Because I think that's one of the hardest things to teach because I mean I can teach it, and like you said, if it's their job to grind it, right? But my problem is that takes time. I think that
Yes.
takes actually a lot of time. So the way I look at it now is sort of like mechanics still like really high up, right? And that leadership really high up. But now this is like sort of like if the person isn't like mechanically like odds are again, I rate Backbone really high up too. I think he's an amazing player. Like Backbone level, like insanely good mechanics, right? And gonna carry. Then like I think like the player needs to like really understand their role, like to the point where like again if you're in a trial and you're sort of like playing different compositions, the coach shouldn't have to tell you, hey, we're playing brawl mirror, you're supposed to like wall chokes and whatnot, right? Like to
Yeah.
me that
Exactly.
stuff, like again if you go to an interview, like again I'm going to keep relating to job stuff now. If you go to an interview, right, and they ask you like some basic question about something should have learned in class, right? If you don't know that, it's just like really weird, right? So
Yep.
like to me,
Yep.
like in Overwatch too, right, like if a player should know their basics and their fundamentals with compositions. And I think like what's honestly one of the biggest things I've actually issues I've realized is a lot of coaching right now, and at least in NA, and it's definitely like not like this in KR, is that you're literally just teaching fundamentals. Like honestly, you barely ever get to take a team out of the fundamental stage because all you're doing is teaching how to basically play their role in the composition and then the
Yep.
basic macro. Which I mean,
Yep.
I'm fine doing that, right? But
Yep.
the times that what honestly made TI so good is that we finished all of that really fast. And then we were able to do more like, higher level stuff, right? And to me, that's when teams become really good, right? Like
Yeah.
the fundamentals, like great and so, really solid, right? Like when I think of fundamentals in OWL, I think Paris, like last year's Paris, I think this year's Paris honestly pretty good because they've amazed on fundamentals. But like last year's Paris under Rush, they had amazing fundamentals. Whenever like TI
Mm-hmm.
scrimmed them, it was like super obvious. Like they like there was no like fundamental mistakes, right? Like and I think if you like even like shock too, I'd say, and if the players already have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just really big, and
Mm-hmm.
what I've just noticed is like teaching that over time, it takes like so long, and the problem is like you don't have a lot of time with how
Yeah, that's
seasons
true.
are,
That's true.
and that's what
That's true.
worries me the most. And yeah,
Yeah, I understand that. I'll counter that with this though.
Mhm.
Whenever I'm trialing, I'm usually trying the player, not their knowledge set.
Yeah,
So like if I think there's a little bit like it's definitely a little bit concerning nowadays if I
Yeah.
come across somebody who doesn't know anything about Brawl Meta or doesn't know anything about Dive or doesn't know anything about Spam or their role as Sombra or Tracer or Brig. Like if you don't know your Brig's role of like packing DPS in this
Yeah.
in like the previous metas, I'm like, where have you been the last 6
Yeah.
months? We've seen basically every variation of meta kind of come around over and over again. So I definitely agree with like there is really not an excuse to not have any good game sense. That being said, maybe they had a bad coach, maybe they
Yeah.
got some bad information, like they got a bad mind. Like again, I just want players. Like again, I'm like I understand that like you may not have the knowledge set, and that definitely is work to put in, but I just think like it obviously depends on your window of time here. If I've got
Yeah.
1 week or a month, then that's a different story. But if we're going long term, I want players that like that again that fit what I look for when I'm thinking of a
Sorry.
good player, and less of a player that has a knowledge set that I want. That being said, I definitely understand what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
definitely agree that fundamentals are really lacking. Like I'm not going to name any names here, but like watching Overwatch League this weekend in Steel Series was really concerning. Like,
Oh no!
never
I
seen a
mean,
team-
if anyone watched my stream, you'd see me like roasting a few things on just like how alts were used in certain situations, and I was just like, but yeah.
It's just problematic, and it's like a lot of that's like those teams haven't scrimmed together a whole lot, but even then, it's like, guys, do you know how to play the game? Like,
all those teams, by the way, have been scrimming for quite a bit.
Okay,
like
so no excuses.
months. There's no excuses for any of those teams. Boston
okay.
maybe, but even then, I think in KR they were scrimming. So
Yeah, so either way, it's concerning for me. So
Yeah.
That's kind of like I agree with you there, but to me it's like
I do
almost
like the
feel like-
point. I like the point you said where it was like long term versus short term, and like I think that's really important to take into account too.
Sure.
I definitely agree with that. I think that's something that I think long term you're right. You can definitely take in someone who can learn more, but short term I think you have to think a little bit differently. I also think oh sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. That was basically it. I just think like I spent a lot of time like studying like different leadership things, and like one of the big things that I hear a lot of like leaders that I respect saying is like when you're interviewing people,
Mhm.
like don't worry as much about like previous experience and stuff like that. Like just get the type of person who's willing. Like obviously, like I don't want a medical doctor operating on me if they have no idea what they're doing. I don't want to be
a guinea pig.
I don't want to be I don't want to sign a player that's like coach, I'm super motivated, I'm super like I'm gonna grind so hard, and I'm like what? Sorry, like 3.7k peak, and I'm like this is for a contenders team. Like I don't know about that. Like there's obviously like parameters that you have to set, but like.
Yeah.
If I would rather sign like, I just hit 4.6k the first time this season, but I'm like really, really hungry, rather than, hey, I've been around the scene for a while and, I don't communicate as much. I'm not as much of a grinder. Like that's more concerning for me. And because like we saw that a lot with, I'm trying to think of like, what was a recent comparison I can think of? Again, like you look at some of the team, like some of the players, like on Paris, some of the players on London, some of the players like the top contenders players. You're like, man, nobody knew who these guys were like 3 or 4 months ago.
Yep. I mean, they're just super high SR.
And there they are, like all of a sudden, bingo. So like they're doing something right, and that was only a couple of months. So I think like there's somewhere out there there's like a 4.6k peak player that just hit it, who in 1 year we're gonna be talking a lot about. And it's like that's what you look out for those guys.
Yep, and like long term, they're just super strong. Like Infected, like his ball is like I haven't like seen him play too much, but heard like amazing things about him, right? And like he just popped up, right? Like I think one that also popped up a long time ago, and I use this guy as an example is Sparker. Sparker was found at a comp, and then from there, he went to BH, and then from there, now he's he's benched right now because of age, but he'll be on London, right? And I think Sparker is like a very, very good example. But yeah, one thing else I think it's something I think is really important, and I know a lot of teams, at least some teams, take into account is pre-existing synergy and the concept of like naturally synergizing. So like I'll give an example, like Outlaws, right? They signed like a tank line from Talon. I know when I talked to like Pre and like Supreme on Justice, they were like, yeah, we were looking at like all these players have pre-existing synergy. What are your like thoughts on that? Because like I personally feel about like I think it's really important for pre-existing synergy, and I think that a lot of people just say, "Hey, we're gonna grab 6 players, and we did all these like internal like trials, right? Like 12v12, and like they're doing really well in the internal trials, but and when it actually comes down to like taking the best out of those people and putting them into like an actual trial, like scrim versus an actual team, like there's just no synergy. People don't like sync
Yeah.
well together, right? And like it's just sort of a mess. So like, what's
Yeah.
your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think like you're going to see a lot of teams that do pick up like, okay, this player, this player, this player, this player, but I think whether it's the leadership or the pre-existing synergy that's not there, they're going to flop around. I think the biggest way that pre-existing synergy like actually matters
Hmm.
is when you have teams that had success, basically players that had success together, and they try and bring some of the ingredients for that success into the new team. Um, like I distinctly remember like having like trialing different players with different teams, and they were with so and so and they were a really good team, and they were amazing, and like they come in and they're like, all right, this is what we're gonna do. Like there's that confidence,
Hmm.
and there's that okay, this is how we do things, this is like we're gonna get things rolling. And so when you're bringing in like, for example, players that were from a previous successful team, it's not just that the fact that they know each other, it's the fact that they already know how to succeed, and so they kind of like set the tempo for like what's to be going on later on. I'm not saying that's like you only pick
Yeah,
pre-existing
yeah,
synergy with players
yeah,
with teams that are only good. Bad teams, like you could find a really good player in a really bad team. But I think like that's where again it like kind of like directly translates to in-game leadership, because you have players that kind of already know together what they need to do for success, and they kind of get the rest of the team on board with it.
yeah. And I think one biggest thing that I've noticed with this too is the getting on board with the team aspect, right? The team has to want to be on board, right? Like
Yeah,
people can't take that as like, oh, this guy thinks he's better than me, and
yeah,
and like, how dare he
yeah,
say this and all that type of stuff, and like take it in a negative way, right? It has to be
right,
more of
right,
like, you know what? Yeah, like person technically does have more experience than you, right? Technically,
yeah,
and it's fine if he leads, right? And like
yeah,
we work together as a team, we work hard together, and we go from there, right? And I
yeah,
think like having people with more experience, people with less experience is actually pretty good because it drives people up, right? It brings
yeah,
people up, and I think the biggest thing, like I
absolutely.
said, is just making sure like people don't clash. I think I've seen a lot of teams where like there's a lot of clashing happens, right? And I think we can say in contenders and even trials, even tier
Oh yeah,
three, right? Like people don't really realize how big of a problem it could be, like personality wise, play
yep,
style wise,
yep,
right? And like and it's nothing to do with the player itself, right? It's just like how the team was actually built, if you actually think
yep,
about it,
yep.
right? So yeah.
That was the best thing I did with Sheer Cold over
Mhm.
the fall, was like it was basic like macro fundamentals, and then like literally getting those guys to work together and like putting out little spats and this and that. No, I don't trust this person, or I'm irritated over this, and like literally like that was the biggest impact I had the entire season, was doing that crap and like motivating players to step up. And I'm sure that you've got stories just like that as well with teams that you work with, where if that's not situated, it just doesn't matter. Like nothing matters. Like it coaching is such a just huge pile of ingredients of macro and micro and one-on-ones and this and that, but like the players have to work together, and you can't have player spats and player attitudes and player egos getting in the way, and I don't want to play this player, or I don't trust this player, or like I've had players tell me like, well, I just stopped calling because this player calls so much, or
Yeah.
well,
Oh yeah.
I don't feel like it matters if I grind because this player isn't good enough, or like, or I don't feel like I don't really trust this player to make a call, and so I'm just gonna be like, for I had players that were like, well, I'm calling dives because I know that player's not gonna call the right thing, like that kind of stuff. Like everything stops, the world freezes
Yeah.
until that's fixed. Like nothing matters until that's handled.
Yeah.
and
I think
and that's where like maybe the pre-existing synergy comes in, but it's also like the buy-in. Like you have to have players that like really buy into like the whole
yeah.
fundamental thing.
Yeah, well, one thing Salt Shaker said, and for people who don't know who Salt Shaker is, he's the head coach of Obey now, and before he was head coach of Odyssey. Pretty smart guy. I've heard like a lot of good things about him. He like, said a really like smart thing. He said lack of experience can also mean a new perspective, and I think that's something that's it's honestly really smart, right? Like
Yep.
if you just straight up think about it, right? You think about new players like coming up, right, in Owl contenders or whatnot. I'll give an example of Tree. I think Tree is like I think a backbone. I actually think a lot of Tree. I think they're both very very flexible, and I think they're both like very mechanically capable. In that same sort of tier. And like they're very new, right? Well, when I think of back in the day, now he's not as new, right? But when they're very new players, and they sort of essentially would bring a different perspective on the game in terms of how they've grown and how they understand the play of the game. And
Yep.
obviously, it's worked for them because otherwise they wouldn't be so mechanically inclined or so high
just
level
just
or
to be
whatnot.
clear,
Yeah.
when Salt Shaker says that, he's just saying I can play Arista here, and most people are too stupid to play Arista. Or in other
Yeah,
words, I'm so stupid, I'll find a way to make
I don't know if
Arista
I
work.
agree with,
Right.
but I mean, I could agree with it. If it works, it
Your mic
works,
is playing
right?
up just a
Only
little
in
bit.
oh, sorry. Oh, I mean, sure, it could
Yeah.
work, right? But like, I would say probably only in NA or EU. I'd be curious
Yeah.
to see that work in Korea.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair though, I think like piggybacking off what Salt Shaker said is like with people with new perspectives often break archetypes. Sometimes that stuff doesn't work, but like Salt Shaker's got the pedigree. It worked. We
Mhm.
were with phase 2 and stupid Salt Shaker is playing main tank for me. And I'm like, all right, Salt, you're playing main tank. And we started playing. I remember that official match where, Don from Paris Eternal, his internet dies, Salt Shaker's in. I'm like, Salt Shaker, we're on Nepal. What do we play? He's like, all right, we're going Reaper, we're going May, we're going Orisa. He sounds just like that. We're just gonna run it down. And I'm like, and it worked. And
Yeah.
then what ended up happening is we started actually using Reaper, May, Torb on certain maps and beating Goats with it. And then all of a sudden, Goats is gone, and guess what people are playing? Reaper, May in Orisa. It's like, hey, I don't know if it was all Salt Shaker or not, but like it kind of like it took guts for someone to break that archetype.
Yeah.
And this isn't just for metas too. It's like it's a different perspective. Like, a player that doesn't know, oh, that's just how you do things around here. Nobody ever questions it. People go, well, wait, why? And then either you come up with a different idea or a new perspective, or it makes you reevaluate the old perspective and like reaffirm it. For example, like I was telling people how I do like these goofy Reddit write-ups. And even though I already know what I'm writing up, it makes me think about it again, and I feel like I understand the concept because I have to like explain it and reevaluate. So maybe in Saul Shaker's perspective, he comes up with a funny comp, and we're like, okay, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because this, and you end up understanding the base composition even better because you kind of try to poke a hole in it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, this is something that I definitely I learned a bit ago, or because I was I was a pretty shitty coach a long time ago in my opinion. But one thing I learned about is actually taking in players' input more and sort of understanding input and sort of because they see in all honesty I'm like a diamond. Well, I hit a 3.8, so I'm not amazing at the game, right? Mechanically. So players, they have a feeling, right? Like they're able to feel stuff, and they're with that feeling, they're able to sort of grasp different things. And you're as a coach, you won't really be able to see that as well. So taking that input and sort of going from there, I think gives a lot of perspective. This also goes into something I want to talk about in coaches, and I'll send you a link actually in a bit. I think it's really interesting.
Okay.
But yeah, so when we get there, I'll talk about it. But yeah, definitely. Anything else on players? I think we talked about a lot.
Like we said, just the leadership, the mechanical aspect of things, the willingness, the attitude of grinding, and just learning and accomplishing things. You talked about the game sense, knowing your role, being willing to work with each other, pre-existing synergy. I think communication is good as well, but obviously sometimes it can be a little too much. So that's something you kind of want to balance. I think what I always say is I want every player in my team talking. I just don't need every single player leading. If that makes I think it's
I think that's said really well. That's said really well.
So for example, if I have a flex support that's super silent, I don't care, but I want them calling when they need help, when their sightlines aren't good, or when they want to use an ultimate, and that's all I care about. That's all I want to do. I don't need to say more than that. If you're a main tank, maybe you're not obviously everybody loves the IGL main tank, but at the very base level, just call when you want to go in, what you want to do with your ultimate, and then when you're going out, or for some or your cooldowns or whatever. Just basic stuff. You don't have to be super bossy trying to micromanage, but everybody has to do the baseline of communication, and if you don't, it becomes problematic. So yeah, that's definitely something we look for as well. But yeah, I think what you just said there at the end, to kind of close it up, is players, and they're the one, players are the ones playing the game.
Yeah,
they are the ones playing the game, and we prepare them as best as we can. But even in official matches, they get no feedback, they get no coaching. They have to figure it out on their own. So it's as a coach, you try and with your coaching, try and make players better prepared. But ultimately, you want to find players that are more willing to take responsibility and to take leadership and to take not just be coachable, but to actually take the coaching and go run with it. Figure stuff out on their own. I talk about, oh yeah, Backbone Wraith, and I coach those guys. I mean, really, all I did was just set the stage for those guys to do their own work and to work really hard on their own. And that's what a coach's job should be, is to find players that are willing to take the information, the start that you give them, and run with it. And if you find players that are coachable, but they require you to hold their hand, that's almost as bad as a player who doesn't take any feedback.
Yeah. No, definitely. One thing also I really want to add, and hey, we keep talking. I know we should probably move on, but something that actually is like a pet peeve of mine almost these days is like listening. The players tend to talk so much and they don't listen enough in communication.
Coaches too.
It's yeah, coaches too. I can definitely say that too. I've been a victim of that here and there, right? But like
Yeah,
actually just
yeah,
listening, right? Like in
yeah.
communication and in matches and stuff, right? Like giving. Someone says in my chat like affirmation calls. Like if someone says, "Hey, we want to push," right? Someone should say, "Yeah, I'm ready to go. Let's push," right? But like in general, like
Yeah.
listening, a lot of times people will try and lead too much, or the leader will say something and people don't listen to what he's doing, and then like don't follow up with it. So
Yes.
making sure you're listening, I think is a
Yes.
very important trait too.
Yes. Yes. And I think that comes from like understanding that like, hey, if we don't all follow up on a game plan, it's not going to work.
Yup.
Like that is the most important. Like I go positioning, timing, and like a good plan. Those are the only things in Overwatch that matter. And if you don't have a good plan, it doesn't. It literally doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So if you're not listening, your planning is going to suck.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move into coaches here. Let me send you a
Sure.
link really fast. Okay. So,
All right.
as I said, I've been grinding that school life. I graduated in May. I'm computer science major. I'm mainly in cybersecurity. So I've been actually looking at jobs, right?
Yeah.
And this, I'll pull it up on my screen. So, what I've been looking at, right, is sort of like different companies. I was maybe looking at Amazon and some other stuff. But what I found out is this Amazon is something called the leadership principles.
All
And I
right.
started reading this, and I was just like, huh, some of these things really, really, really apply to like Overwatch coaches and like structure. And then I started
Yeah.
relating
I
like
believe it.
everything to like how coaching structure works to literally how like like sort of like the how do I say like the engineering world works or like the
Sure.
development works, right? And like
Sure.
one of the biggest ones I really like, right, is leaders are right a lot. They have strong judgment and good instincts. They seek diverse perspectives and work to disconfirm their beliefs, right? And like
Yeah.
I think that's like really important, right? And like the next one's like be learn and be curious, right? And you just think of coaches, right? And like assistant coaches. I think like some of these things are, super, super, super important for them to have, right? Because when you think of coaches, you want like if we talk to like anyone, you normally want like a head coach and you want assistant coaches that
Yep.
challenge the head coach, right? Like
Yep.
and
Yeah.
like if the head coaches are right a lot, right? The head coach wants to to disconfirm their beliefs. Assistant coach is right there, right? So being learned and be curious, right? Like a lot of these sort of are in my opinion, what sort of coaches should be. Like another one, have backbone, disagree and commit, right?
Yep. Yep.
So and like the results, right? So like I don't know, this is sort of something cool that I thought was really interesting, and it really changed my perspective on sort of like how like Overwatch coaching works and how it actually honestly applies to the real life. And I was talking to like an
Absolutely.
Amazon like director-ish or like a senior manager, and he was like sort of saying like Overwatch coaching is really related to stuff, and I was like, I haven't really thought about it that way. And then like when he went more into it, he like and he gave me examples, and I was like, oh, you're right. Like all these all these tools and stuff, these communication tools, and
Hmm.
working together, it's all applicable. So
Yeah.
but yeah,
Absolutely.
I just want to start with
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I think the big thing here is like whenever people ask me, I think somebody asked me yesterday, like if I what's the most important thing if you're getting into Overwatch coaching that you need to be looking out for? Like what's the most important thing an Overwatch coach should be trying to do? And the number one thing was you need to be getting feedback, like actively pursuing feedback at all times from other coaches for like trying to, like I said, like it says there, disconfirm your own beliefs from your own players. Like I regularly like, yo, is that good? Like what do you how did you think about that bot review? Like, you guys think that got maximum, am I doing a good job? Is there anything like as a coach, the hardest thing as a coach is getting good feedback because like a lot of like it's hard to get your criticisms on off of your criticism.
Yeah,
um
you're right.
but
And also
it
take it
must
too.
happen. It has to happen. I like my whole ordeal with Uprising Academy was just awful. Like the entire like we ended up making contenders twice in a row and we almost
Mm.
made playoffs and we turned it around okay, but the whole thing was just awful. Like it just was terrible. It was literally awful after awful. But I learned so much from that miserable experience. Um, from like finding what failed, what didn't work, what I tried so many different things. And ultimately, I mean, without that, I would not be the coach I was today. So I'm not. I would never want to go through that again. But I am grateful for what I learned from all that, from like the feedback that I got from all that failure, and all the things that I thought would be the right way of doing things, and they just didn't work.
Yeah.
And so like ultimately as a coach, you have to be willing to get feedback. You have to not be willing to get it. You need to pursue feedback. You need to have, like you said, those assistant coaches. Like I actively pursued coaches that if this coach didn't teach me something or tell me something that I didn't already know, then I didn't want them as a coach.
Yeah.
You know, with Noxious, Temporal, recently with EasyBot and Thor over in Sheer Cold, like those guys were like making me feel stupid all the time. Like I'd be like, we would holler at each other and obviously not in front of the players, but like you're always
Yeah.
disagreeing and this and that. But ultimately, like we figured out so much crud that we would not have done if I just had somebody, like you said, like a yes man and just like, oh, that's just how it is. Like, no, like I want people who disagree with me, who have a different perspective, and that we can figure out what's best from that. And you as a coach have to have the humility to go know not only when you're wrong, but also know when you need to like, okay, you know what? I feel like I'm right, but honestly, this feels like what's best for the team. So we're going to go with that. And I think so many coaches just kind of get in the mindset of like, I'm such a huge brain, but all these players are egotistical and they never listen to me, and the coaches never listen to me, and I'm going to be stuck in tier 3 forever because nobody like is as smart as I am. And I'm like, well, I see so many coaches with that mindset, and I just think it's so toxic. Like it's very much like the whole elo hell mindset that you see of like goldens and silver players. You know, it's like, you know, have you ever considered that maybe you are the problem?
Yeah.
You know, like have you ever considered that? So
I think a lot of it also, we're digressing a bit on trialing, but in scouting, but a lot of it, in my opinion, also comes from like coaches think they're worth a lot more than they are, which I know sounds really mean to say. But like I think a lot of it, like a lot of players, in all honesty, like at this day and age, like the top players, like only want to work with like coaches that are like proven, right? Or like literally they'll see some work and they'll be like, oh wow, yeah, that's really good, right? Like because they'll be like, tell me something I don't know, right? And if you don't tell them something they don't know, then it's like, why, you know, why is this guy coaching me, right? But I think one of the biggest things when I look at coaches, obviously, yeah, tell me something I don't know, right? I see if they're capable to obviously to do something. Like, you know, if I were to give them a task, are capable. Something else that I think is really important to me, I've realized, because I'm a very firm believer of like structure in teams. And you know, if I say like, hey, this is your role, this is what you need to do, right? Like, you know, in my opinion, they should be the ones, you know, doing it. Like, you know, if you're supposed to do a VOD review, like, you know, like twice a week with this, you know, player, right? Like they should be doing that, right? Like I shouldn't have to bug them. Hey, how do the VOD reviews go? You know, there's a report, like, you know, it should be given to head coach, right? Everything should be like, you know, like a flow, like again, like a job, right? You know, your boss at your job doesn't constantly nag you. Hey, you know, I need you to submit this report. Hey, I need you to submit this report. Hey, I need you to submit this report, right? If anything, the worker is normally like, you know, like, hey, what can I do more? What more can I do? What more can I do? Right? Like constantly asking, you know, to get better. Hey, what can I improve? What can I improve? Right? And I think like that's something that's really important, right? And obviously in a trial, you're probably not going to notice that, right? But I think one thing that is really important, I think it's actually like not happening as much, and something I talked to my girlfriend a lot about, Raven, and a lot is references. I feel like a lot of teams don't really check up on references as much as they really should, because I think references say so much about like, you know, whether it's players too or even like staff, right? And I think like a lot of these, like especially for coaches, I think references are like the most important thing, because it says, you know, how hard they work, or you know what they did, and like all that type of stuff, right? So yeah, I think like that's really really important. And because again, in a trial, like like actually, what are you gonna see in a trial? Like you're gonna see their knowledge, right? But you're like, maybe you can have them do one-on-one with a player, or like, you know, have them do a macro VOD review. You can watch it, right? But that's like one thing. Sure, you can trial them for a week, but that's like crazy long, right? Unless you're like an owl team or like a top contenders team and you have the time, sure, right? But like in practicality, like it's difficult, right? So I think like references are really important.
Yep, and it's so easy too. Like in this age of social media, like you can find out. I mean, I'll even ask the guy, like, "Hey, I need references. I need people. Like, I don't need references. I want to talk to people that have worked with you. Can you give you the last 3 managers and a couple players that you've worked with? Like, what was the roster of the team that you work with?" And I'm gonna go do my homework. I'm gonna message them all in Discord and find out what the deal is, and ask them like how much information you were, how good you were at communicating, like how consistently reliable were you. And then, you know, ultimately you find people that fit what you want and what you need, and then like you said, you set a structure. This is what I expect from you, this is what I need from you. That was a big thing that I always try to do with my coaches, like with EasyBot and Thor recently. EasyBot knew what I expected from him, Thor knew what I expected from him, and then I didn't bother them. You know, I would, when we'd meet once a week just to kind of reevaluate goals, and then I was like, all right, this is what I need, and that was it. And then I just let them do their job. You don't micromanage, you don't nitpick, but you just set expectations, and then that's it. You let them do their job.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think like you said, checking the references, like it's so easy to check references,
Yeah.
guys. Like just
Yeah.
ask them, hey,
Yeah.
I need Discord tags of people that you have worked with in the last 6 months right now.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
And if you don't have those, like that's just to me like really crazy. Like if someone asks for
Yeah,
that and you can't provide that, that's just yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
for sure.
the other thing I think is really important, and I as someone who's like again like a CS person, like logic's really important, and in my opinion, coaching like logic's important too, right? To me, a coach should always have an answer for why.
Yeah.
Like you should always have an answer for a why. So like literally like what I'll do is like I'll ask them like a lot of topics
Natter,
I've done.
Natter, why is why so important? Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I couldn't resist.
But like I'll ask them
I've
like
just
the
created
logic
like a
and
paradox
yeah,
in the code.
yeah. No, like the logic and reasoning behind decisions and like what they say, right? And like it'll be surprising when like a lot of coaches don't actually really understand the logic behind it, or they've copied the logic from somewhere else and they don't fully understand it, and it feels like I'm hearing like like a textbook like out of a dictionary or something instead
Yeah,
of like good examples and like stuff. And like again, I'm related to like computer science. If I literally had a phone screen interview earlier where it was like super basic questions, right? And if I could have Googled those questions and got the answer, right? But then later on interview step 2, right? When it's like way more in depth and stuff, can't Google those questions. I'm probably
yep,
screwed, right?
yep,
So
yep.
like, it's sort of like you really need to make sure you actually understand the logic. And I feel like that's where a lot of coaches like, don't put enough time into it. And I think Face was on my stream like a lot earlier when I was talking to Hunter, and what Face said, like what coaches should do the most is just watch a lot of Overwatch, like watch it, like spend so much time and watch Overwatch, live Overwatch, right? And the top coaches, that's what they do. Like they literally spend like, both of us back in the day, we spent like I don't even know how many hours a week on Overwatch, right? Where you're just watching everything and you're understanding why they're doing this. It doesn't make sense. You're questioning stuff, and like I think that's a trait that, in my opinion, like I want from coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Like make sure that they understand the game, make sure they understand the fundamentals. Um, I don't need a dissertation of like
Yeah.
how to use Matrix in the brawl versus brawl mirror so much as that you understand. I mean, obviously it depends on the coach to coach role, right? Like what you need from that coach, but also like just do you understand the game? Do you understand like what the important aspects of the game are? And then the details will come with time. And obviously, honestly, that's kind of something that we look for with players as well. Like, do you understand the game fundamentally?
Yeah. Oh, what are your thoughts on so like to me, right? Like I think one of the biggest things was that I like in general I break down coaches into two things, right? Game sense and then being able to coach. Now, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think you actually need coaches like when you're trialing? Like do you think you need them to have both? Like I'm actually curious.
So it's difficult for me because I have had coaches I've worked with who were not very good at coaching,
Mhm.
but they're good at coaching. They could talk to me, if that makes any sense. So in other words, I've had coaches before that were like they were okay communicators, but they weren't amazing communicators. But I was like, I could if I came to them with they would basically just break down stuff for me. Like I literally had a coach who would make videos for me explaining like his thoughts on the meta matchup and like what went wrong in the scrims in like 20-25 minutes, or he'd meet with me for 20-25 minutes and discuss it with me, and I'd ask questions, and basically I would go to, and I would feel like, okay, I'm enriched, I'm prepared, and that was his value. Almost like an analyst rather. Like he would like kind of give like his opinion, and he was like a tool in that aspect. I've had other coaches who were like more focused on the one-on-one aspect, and so I would do a lot of one-on-ones, but I couldn't do all of them, and they'd help me out with that. And obviously, in that instance, you definitely need somebody who can coach, right? Because they're
Yeah.
working directly with the
Yeah.
players. So I
Communicating.
think it depends on what you're looking for. I think if you're looking with somebody who's going to be working directly with the players, they have to be good communicators. They have to be good, like good at coaching, as you said. And they have to understand the game. They have to obviously understand the game. But then you also got people that maybe they're going to be working more with you, the analysts, the strategic coaches. They don't have to be these great orators whatsoever. They don't even need to have great people skills, but they could talk to you. They can get their points across, and they understand that. The one thing that I do you have to watch, I do watch out for sometimes with coaches is that sometimes I have a little bit less so than it used to be, but I do see sometimes people that are I like to describe them as meta coaches.
Hmm.
Where they're like, oh, they know brawl so well, or they know dive so well, they've solved the comp, but then we change meta and they're just completely clueless. It's
Yeah.
like they've specialized so heavily, and then once the meta changes, they have no idea what they're doing, and then their value just plummets. So I think that's something that I would always look for when I'm trialing a coach. But honestly, it's hard for me to narrow it down because simultaneously it feels like there's so many things that you look for, but also it feels like there's only a few really important things, and they're kind of the same across the board.
Yeah. Um. So I think, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's like a very, very valid point. I had another point I wanted to add on to it. Got distracted by an
No
important
worries.
DM.
No worries.
But what do you think about what was it? Mm.
The moon landing fake? I'm not sure. You know, maybe. Not so sure.
Sorry, completely blanking on what it was, but it's like a really important topic I want to talk about.
Oh no.
Like I do like your topic, like about like the coaches in the meta. I think that's very, very relevant, and I think
Yep.
in all honesty, I think it's fine to have specialties, right? But like I think you should be well
Yes.
rounded and like
Yep.
understand things as well. I think also like what's your thoughts sort of on like taking in a coach and like teaching them up, like sort of like, because like let's say you have a coach who's like really good at one-on-ones, right, and you have him work on one-on-ones, but like he's not like competent in
Yep.
macro, right? So like
Yep.
what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I definitely have had like I don't have a problem with it. Like I think that the thing is like with coaches is it's similar to players where you see potential and you try and get some potential out of the players. But I think just like players, when you do sign a coach, he needs to be providing value. Like I wouldn't sign a plat player just because he had great potential if I'm coaching a grandmaster team. So if I see somebody as a coach and I'm like, hey, this person has good knowledge and they could definitely fill a role, it could definitely help out, and maybe down the road they could help out a lot more, then yeah. But obviously there would have to be at least a base level of value. Otherwise, it's like, well, why am I wasting my time? You know, I'm not like the babysitters club, and I hope that like some of the coaches that have worked with me, were able to learn something and were able to improve themselves while they were working with me, and because obviously I learned a lot from them, so I hope that that was able to kind of transfer over. But I kind of I do agree that there is coaching projects, I guess,
Yeah.
where like, hey, this coach, I mean, I'm gonna call him out. EasyBot definitely was,
Mm.
I think, a coaching like relatively unknown tier 3 coach and like not super well, like was like funny like British man, and he got a lot of good feedback from like the references I checked, and he had a tendency to like ramble on and on and on, but he knew his stuff, man. Like he really knew his stuff, and I was like, all right, screw it. Like we're gonna pick this boy up. I'm gonna teach him a thing or two about like communication, and he
Yeah.
taught me a thing or 12 about Overwatch. So like that's like I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess like the next one maybe I'll ask you is like, is there any other topics I guess in coaches that you think is like really important besides communication, the game sense, the how to learn and like grind and work hard? What are things like you know what else do you think, is there any qualities that are important?
Um, Again, like we said, we kind of talked about that humility aspect, not just for me, but also for other coaches as well. Like there are some coaches, they're like, oh, I know everything. And I'm like, if a player second guesses me, I'm just going to fall to pieces, right? You have to be able to understand the why. You have to be able to explain yourself and communicate well. Um,
Mhm.
but Yeah, I think that's the big one, like being able to take criticism for sure. Um, and then I'm trying to think what else. I mean, personally, I like having coaches that are comfortable working one on one with players.
Mhm.
I think there are very few coaches that can do that. I think players that can call themselves micro coaches, but then ultimately they get into a one on one and they just fall apart. Like when I was trialing EasyBot, who ultimately filled a one on one role with us, I had him specifically work one on one with several players, and I had him record the sessions and I had him send it to me, and I want to know how it went. So I want to know if the players got anything out of it. Did they learn anything? Was it just like, oh yeah, well maybe the team could have done something here, or like maybe you could just clean up a little bit of your matrix usage, yeah. But was there actually like actual value gotten from the one on one? And like
Yeah.
that's something that I wanted to do, and I think that's a pretty important role. Like in teams, is like you don't really need that many macro and strategic coaches. You need coaches that are also just able to get like one on one's got to be done. Like self review has to be done, and I think coaches that are good at that is important.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Are important.
I think one of the last things that I think is also important, and you mentioned it earlier, is like making sure that like everything is done concisely and neatly. I think one of the things that I've noticed a lot of coaches when they give me feedback or in trial process, I'm just getting this massive splurb of like massive text and it's like timestamps, and I'm just
Yeah.
like I look at this and I'm just like, what am I looking at right now, right? And like I don't think coaches realize that like in the grand scheme of things, like the amount like there's something like quality versus quantity sort of, right? And like you could have
Oh
like
yes.
you could have like 10 pages of stuff, right? But like if that 10 pages can't really be taken into like, like a few good concepts or like a multiple good concepts that can be like, taught, then like,
Yeah.
there's no point in that, right? Like
Yeah.
I could write one page, right? And like literally have three good solid points, right? And those are the three things that we need to work on, right? With a
Absolutely.
bunch of examples. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, I think like that's really important for people to understand because I think people don't really fully understand how to summarize work, and I think like
No.
as head coaches, like well, I guess I head coached a few teams back in the day, but not as recently unless it was unofficial, sort of I did, but you just don't want a massive blob of text. It's really hard to read, and it's really hard to take the information from there.
No,
So
no.
I think
There's a lot of like people that think that like just because they can recite off information that makes them a good coach. Like if you can't communicate that info, then you're worthless. And I think the other thing that you mentioned there is like if you can't communicate it simply, then it's also
yes,
worthless. Like I
yes,
think you mentioned earlier of like okay why it's kind of frustrating how sometimes it feels like you're always hammering on the fundamentals. Like you want players that already have good fundamentals.
yeah,
I mostly agree, but I also think that like even top teams like the Shock and like
yeah.
if you ultimately look at like team fights those guys lose, I guarantee you it's fundamentals like or it's
I
something
mean, here
goofy.
and there, yeah, I'd say here and there, but
Like a lot of the fights like there's just a little bit of like okay there's a miscommunication, the timing was off, or there's
mm,
like a misunderstanding or like this and that. So it's like so like everyone like looks at okay whoa like Cloudy like had this big brain pin across the map and like it caught like he knew that the Ana didn't have sleep dart and had like 1.5 seconds before sleep dart came back and then he did the 180 fire strike trick that like but like ultimately like that stuff just doesn't matter. He's good because he has a very good fundamental understanding of how to play Reinhardt
mm,
and he just applies it over and over again. And obviously the little nit tricky like little bits and things, but ultimately like what Cloudy does really well at Reinhardt is very, very basic. He just hits the basics over and over and over again, and he doesn't miss, right?
yeah,
And with coaching, it's the same kind of aspect. If you want your team to be good, you don't need to be like fancy and flashy, know all the tricks and micro macro. You just need to be really good at the basics.
yeah,
Really good at the basics. Like you look at Third Impact, and you guys were miserable to play against when I was coaching because you guys just didn't make basic errors. You
no,
just did. It
yeah,
just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So it's like it didn't matter if we like big brained you. We'd win one team fight or two team fights over the course of a map, but you guys were going to win everything else because the basics were so well done. And I think honestly, I think like even in Overwatch League, I see most team fights lost due to stupid errors,
yeah.
not due to
Oh, 100%.
big brain
I've
stuff.
seen like a lot of divas just fly into the enemy team and just demech,
Yeah,
or just
it's just
like
a
people not
misunderstanding.
understanding,
Yeah,
tempo.
exactly. And so you as a coach, you don't need to bring that stuff to the table.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to bring like that. This stuff just has a lower return on investment, like you said, like the
Yeah.
quality, not the quantity.
Yeah, and I think and one thing I'll mention too, and I know this for a fact, if you're trialing for top teams, it's important that you don't just say fundamentals because the coaches,
Oh,
know that.
yeah,
It's obviously
yeah,
different. You're talking to players, right? But it's
yeah,
important that like you also show you understand advanced concepts too.
yes,
Like
yes,
when I like trialed with like Valiant, like one of the biggest things like I had to show was like yes, like they're making some fundamental mistakes that I showed them, but like I had to give
yes,
like more advanced like examples as
yes,
well. And I think like that's really really important too
yes,
because it shows that you're smart too, right? Like
yes,
and then you can take stuff to the next level. Because I agree,
yes,
like obviously yes, like Shock. I know for a sort of a fact when a new meta comes, almost every single OWL team has to relearn fundamentals for that meta comp, especially if it's something that no one's ever played before. No one's gonna know what their micro to macro is, right? Like they have to figure out like what their kit is in
yeah,
the composition,
agreed,
right? But
agreed.
like after they figure that out, then yeah, they're gonna start going in to try and figure out
Right,
more advanced
right.
stuff, right?
Right.
But
I agree, but I also think that's a flaw with a lot of the coaching trials that I've done, whether it's by
yes,
players or coaches, because there's a lot of times for teams that I trialed, even teams that I actually landed, where I
mm,
felt the need like I had to trump it up and show
yeah,
off how much I knew. When I was like, guys, we're losing this team fight because of this, like
yeah,
and I felt like I would provide a lot of good feedback on like how to fix it. That was like not
yeah,
just the get better guys, but like this is what we need to adjust. But I do think that it's a strength that like as a coach you need to know micro or know like some of the details so you can communicate better. But
hmm,
also I think that's a part of that's not always a great thing. I think a lot of teams like
hmm,
I remember I won't say who, but there was a team I tried with about a year and a half ago where I
Mhm.
was literally told, well, the reason we really like you as a coach, you're a great coach, but the other players thought the other coach knew more. And I was
Yeah,
like,
and like
and I know what the other coach said, and I know what they said, and I'm like, well, I could have said that, but that stuff is bad feedback to give. So
yeah.
it's almost like like
No,
I
I completely agree. Like
I'm like,
I think
screw
like
the system, you know?
I agree, and I think the system could be a lot better in the sense of like there's a difference
Yeah,
between giving feedback to players and feedback to
yeah,
coaches,
yeah,
right? Like I
yeah.
think
That's
if you're giving feedback to coaches, right, it should be like here are the fundamentals, but like at a higher level, like this is what we need to start
true.
working on,
Sure.
right?
I
And if
also
you
think it matters whether you're trying as head coach or assistant coach
that
as well. For
that is
example,
very true.
like if I have a strat coach telling me that we just need to work on our timing or whatever, or something really fundamental that I already know, that's not really helpful to me. Like
Yeah,
I need more processed information.
yeah.
But as like a head coach, like there's a lot of yeah.
It
Anyway,
depends also what type of head coach you want to be, right? Like if you want to be like a
yeah,
really good leader, right? Like again, Amaze, in
yeah,
my opinion, is an amazing leader, right? And like, and I think I sort of think of you as that way. You're like a really good leader who still understands the game, right? Or you maybe have like a coach like in my opinion, Krusty, like he's sort of a leader, but I always think of more of as like a gig of brain, right? Who's just like incredibly smart, right? And like sort of just like, I think he's like more of like a brain guy, if that makes sense. I think as Supreme, I think
yeah,
of
yeah.
like a big leader, and then he's got like, like sort of, more of the knowledge people to help him. So it sort of depends also like what type of head coach you are and like what you're
Sure.
trialing for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
But
I agree.
yeah, okay. I'm trying to think what else. I think we talked a lot about roles too in coaches, which I think is interesting because and that like goes into like understanding what your role is and what you should like really know, right? When you go
Mhm.
into roles and whatnot.
Agreed. Agreed.
Um,
It just depends on the role.
yeah. Okay. Anything else for coaches? We could go into Q&A too. I'm totally down
Yeah,
with that.
I'm done for Q&A.
Okay.
We can do my chat, your chat, and
We
then
yeah,
Jeff could
just
either
one at a time. One at a time. But yeah, so let's go into questions and whatnot. So anyone in either of our chats have questions, spam them out. Let's hear them. My chat's normally quiet. They don't like talking a lot.
It's okay. You're an too intimidating of a figure.
I don't know about
I
that.
got a question for any good questions for when you're interviewing coaches? I mean, we touched on this a lot, but do you want
Mhm.
to? Are there any questions that you'd add when you're like interviewing a coach? What do you think?
Any questions you wait.
Any good questions for when you're interviewing coaches?
Like what I'd ask, what the trial would ask the coaches?
What you would ask if you were interviewing a coach?
Oh, I mean, like I said, so like I would ask, a lot about like their experience, their references. I'd ask what type of coach they are, what they specialize in. I think I might have said that. And then I'd honestly, like, I go straight into technical. I'm the type of guy that's like very technical, so I'd go straight into technical and start asking them tech questions. But yeah.
Mm. Makes sense. I think for me, it'd just be basically like, I would put it this way. Hi, you can tell me about yourself, and then we're just going to get you trialing with other like working with the players ASAP.
Yeah,
Like,
I think that's important too.
uh,
I think what players matter, like what the players think, I think matters a lot more. Like I think what I've realized is like, yeah, it's important like what I think too, right? And like, especially if I want the person working a lot with the players. But what I think is important, and like, if I can see improvement in the person, even if the person's not amazing, but the players like the person, right? Then like that to me is like really important because the player will spend time with him, and will work with the person, and to me that's like crucial.
mhm, mhm.
So here I've got some good questions here. Okay, what are the best resources for coaches to learn now? That's a great question. Those don't, in my opinion, they don't really exist. Like in terms of like you learning yourself, I feel like there's going to be a lot of self learning, right? Like sure, like Spilo and I both do like educational content, but like in my opinion, again, if you really want to be a good coach, right? You need to think for yourself, as mean as that is to sound. Like I was talking to someone earlier today. I'm not gonna say who, but like it's good to like talk to someone else who's like a higher level coach. For me, like I talk to like I have some connections with some Alpha coaches, and I'll like pick my brain about certain things. Like, hey, why'd you do this? What do you think about this and this, right? And I'll always know my why. So like if they ask me like why you're saying this, like I'll make sure like I have like reasons to back it up, right? But like I'll sort of assert what my thoughts are, right, with someone who I think is smarter than me, right? or and that'll help me learn more, right? Otherwise, in my opinion, it's a lot of self-learning. It's like I literally earlier today I was watching like KR trials. I was watching Team CC versus Team Diamond, right? And like I don't think I really learned much, but I like confirmed more things that I already knew, right? But like and that's still helpful, right? Like confirming things you already knew, right? That's useful
Sure.
information. So like and I think that's like again, like it's just watching a lot. Like I think I can't even emphasize enough too, watching like players, like top ranked players in like stream and comp and stuff, and sort of understand the small tendency things that they do different than like other people. You'll start noticing like patterns and things that like other people have figured out. Like one of the biggest things I'll say that Krusty's done that I think no one else really is able to do right now in Owl, and why it makes like him sort of being able to learn so much, is that like Krusty's not, in my opinion, he's never thinking at where like what's happening currently. He's thinking about what's happening ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about like he's the first one to make mixed rosters really work, right? There's one other team I think that had mixed rosters working. It was Philly, right? That was sort of they sort of worked, right?
Yeah.
But like he's only one, right? And like in my opinion, he's constantly like thinking like what's better, right? Like what, like he's thinking maybe like different like structures and stuff, right? Like he's got a Western coach, he's got a Korean coach as assistant coaches, right? So he's got different structures maybe that work for him. He's thinking of different things that help him and help the team and the players, right? What players will help him more. So constantly sort of like not necessarily experimenting, but like thinking at a higher level.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's the same thing as the same cry that we said with players. Like, if you're not, you need to be hungry. You need to be hungry to get better, and with whether it's feedback or research or doing this and that, and finding like what the most efficient. Like, not it doesn't have to be 14 hours a day, but you got to be you got to be figure out like what's the most efficient way for me to learn. Like, there was a period of my life, like I don't know, I got started in coaching just like listening to VOD reviews over and over and over and over and over again, like a million different VOD reviews from any resource I could find on YouTube. Plat, Doomfist, Team VOD reviews, Silver Genji, GM Diva, and I'm taking notes and all this kind of stuff. And I got in the habit of just listening to literally hundreds and like, I guess eventually thousands of hours of that crud, like every single day. And then at some point, I remember probably 6-7 months ago, I was listening to some like Plat Diva VOD review and kind of like autopiloting and like, doing like death match. And I'm like, wait, what am I doing? Like, I'm going to go 45 minutes and I'm not going to learn a single thing here. This is so inefficient of use of my time. I could be taking these 45 minutes and like actually studying a replay or something like this, or like, or just not doing anything and just doing work, having more energy to focus harder later. But the ultimate, like, you have to be efficient with your time, and you have to really, really, like I said, treat it like how you would with a player. Like, look for feedback, study, like listen to yourself. Like I always tell coaches, listen to your VOD reviews over again every now and then. How do you sound?
That's actually really helpful. That's actually like really helpful, because what you'll notice is like, what I'll say is like what I've noticed when I did that before. I've noticed that sometimes I like, if I'm tired, I'll like say things again, or like not say I'll like just like ask questions multiple times. Like or I'll notice that like I like talk about a topic too long, like 1 or 2 minutes longer than it should be, right? And I think that's like really that's really important.
Can you get your points across more efficiently?
Yeah.
Like, and that's like, but if you're not like actively like trying to get better, then it's gonna be tough. I've got a question for in my chat. Any tips for climbing the coaching ladder, so to speak?
Networking. It's really shitty, but a lot of networking, a lot of networking, and then like actually like showing like when like I'll put it this way: you can network, but if you don't actually like, you aren't the value at what you're networking, right? Or like who you're trying to like talk to, then you're gonna have a problem, right? Like if I were to go like apply for a job at Amazon, right, and like I'm not even like smart or something, right? I go to the interview like, hey, this guy got me the interview and whatnot, and then
if you suck.
I just bomb the technical interview, right? And I just like, so.
By the way, can I clarify in the networking, because I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
The way I networked, so people will hear networking and like connections, and they get like, oh, shoot, I don't know anybody. Like, how am I supposed to do that? When I first started getting into coaching, I literally messaged, I think, like 25 teams, like Diamond, Plat, and Masters teams. I was like, hey, here's my stream. I do educational content. Would you mind if I did give a VOD review and maybe you let me coach your team? This is years ago. And most of them said no, because they're like, what's your SR? And I'm like, Plat. And this is before I like climbed. But like, I actually landed a job with a Diamond team, and I did a couple of VOD reviews and helped them out a little bit. And then I did reached out to like 15 different teams. I ended up landing a job with a High Masters team, and then I jumped from that to Chicken Contendies, which coincidentally is the team that you worked for a long time down the road.
Yeah, down the road. Yeah.
And I tried out for like 10 different teams, and I got 3 or 4 different offers, and I obviously went with the one that I like the best, and that's networking, like right there. Like I hear so many people complain about they never get any opportunities, never get this and that. You know what I did in my I got one Overwatch League trial this off season, which I'm not happy about, but you know what, it sucks.
It was rough, man. It was really rough.
The only way I got at Overwatch League trial is because I reached out to this team and it was like, hey, this is my stuff. This is what I'm going to do. I can VOD review. I'm available today to interview, and I can VOD review this replay that I found from your team at any point in time. Just let me know, and like I gave us a couple of working samples. Like I'm not waiting for them to come after me. Yeah. Like I don't trust the Overwatch community to be smart enough to understand the brilliant genius that I am. A kid, without me like going out of my way to set up my own opportunities. And like, so that's the most important part of networking is like putting in the legwork to get like what you value think you can provide, make sure that it gets out there. I just don't try like, oh, I never got the opportunity. Well, did you like actually try? Now, I reached out to like 20 Overwatch League teams and only like 2 or 3 wrote back.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like I then I can say, hey, I did everything I can.
Yeah.
But until you can get to that point, I don't think you can really complain about like having connections and not giving opportunities.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think, like I said, my DMs are always open. I may not reply right away because I get a lot of DMs, or I may forget. Hence, my status thing right now is bump my DMs. But I'm a firm believer of just trying to connect and trying to like actually network and like meet people and sort of like And I think like one of the biggest things I'll say is that's how you're gonna grow, right? That's how you're gonna learn stuff from them. You're gonna, at the end of the day, if you really think about it, when top contenders teams, they look at like top contenders coaches, right? But then the top contenders team will be like, oh, we need a coach. And the top contenders coach, is like, oh, I'm on a break or I'm not coaching anymore, but I can suggest this person. He's been doing pretty good. Like I'm talking to him and he seems like he knows his stuff. And then all of a sudden you maybe have a trial, right? So or I've worked with this person on the side, like on this team where I did some paid sessions, right? And like I think like once you're at a higher enough rank, like once you're like in top contenders, right? Like you make owl connections and hopefully stuff works. This last season was brutal, man. Like it was brutal. Like so many coaches I know literally I think the average is like 1 or 2. Like I was really lucky with how many I got, but like it was brutal. Like it's the not expansion part like really hurt people. And then with all owl teams wanting like Korean coaches, right? Because of mixed rosters, everyone wanting to go mixed pretty much or full Korean. It just killed Western coaches. We'll go Twitch into that. But okay. So we already talked about what are the best ways to improve as a coach, right? We talked about how to like work on yourself, sort of watch a lot of stuff, ask questions, understand the why, and like watch your own VODs. Okay. So, in my experience, I've had times where I felt I didn't know enough about specific situations players approached me about. How do you advise on dealing with those scenarios? Oh, this is a really good question. Did you hear what I said? Sorry, I said it really silently.
Yeah, in my situation, I had times where I felt that players didn't want specific situations. But yeah, that's a really good question. I think the way you look at that is like there's a lot of questions where players would come to me, and usually related to gameplay in that aspect. And you just have to be honest with them and be like, I don't know. But let's go figure it out.
Yeah.
That's the key. It's like you can't just be like, I don't know. You have to go. There was a time where I would like there was a VOD review over like how to play this situation. I was like, I honestly don't know the answer to that. But I know that finding the answer is important. So let's go figure it out and let's go watch like a bunch of replays and let's take some notes and let's like the debate over it. But let's come up because like my job as a coach, especially as like a head coach, is not always to have the answers, but to make sure that the answer is found.
Yes.
Like to find the solution. I don't have to be the smartest guy in the room, but I make sure that the solution that we come to a solution.
Yep.
And so in that, depends on your role as a coach with the team. But even as like an assistant coach, like if you're the big brain strat coach and you're posed a question you don't know, don't fall to pieces. Nobody cares. Like go figure it out. Go talk with the players. Like go figure it out.
I've definitely been in situations where I definitely don't know everything, right? Like I'm sort of a strat coach, assistant coach, at like priority I'd say, or mainly. But like I've been like literally someone's asked me something and I'm like I think about it and I'm like I might have the answer, but actually, you know what? I'm going to ask another player on the team what their thoughts on this is, because maybe the question relates to them. For example, like maybe like with Briggs and, how how aggressive should the Zen be, right? And the Zen player is asking me like, I got a pretty good answer for that, right? But then I'll ask the Brig player like, hey, it's like how aggressive do you want the Zen player being? Because like that those two play together, right? And like the Brig player definitely has an input on this. At least I hope they have an input on this, right?
Yes.
So sometimes also using other players as resources helps a lot
Yeah.
too.
Exactly.
And it's nothing wrong if you don't know the answer, right? I mean, it sucks,
No.
it's fine, and that just says that everyone's learning, everyone's improving. Even
No.
owl coaches, by the way, don't know stuff. I've had people DM me and DM other people about just like questions on
Yeah.
a general meta or stuff like, hey, do you think this is good, right? Like no one knows everything, right? It just doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
Exactly.
um
Exactly.
it,
You
it's
need to
just
get to that
how
point.
it's just how you solve the problem when you don't know, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yep,
All right.
exactly. I have a question. This
Yep.
depends on the team philosophy, but would you rather build a coaching staff first and then find players, or vice
Oh, this is a
versa?
great question. Oh man.
I think it
Oh.
matters immensely on the tier of Overwatch that you're playing at.
I think it matters on the structure you're going for. I think it depends if you want a player run team or you want a staff run team, in all honesty. Or if there's like a certain person you really badly want to get. But like to me, like I'm all for getting coaches first, or at least getting a decent amount of coaches first, and then like you can try the last one or two later. It just
Yep.
depends on how many coaches you want. But like definitely head coach always first, and then maybe get an assistant coach, and then if you want one more later, you do that one person later. But like in my opinion, you should always have coaches first because you know, in my opinion, the structure should always be around staff and then players. Like if you want a player run roster, then sure, you get your players first, right? And then the
Yeah.
coaches come in. But to me, I'll be very honest. Like if a player run roster is coming to me and says, "Hey, I want you to trial," right? Like I'm gonna be like very skeptical already because like I don't know if the players like work well together. I mean, sure, I'm assuming, hope they do, right? I don't know,
Yep.
like I just don't know much about it, right? So like I'm skeptical, like sort of off the bat, right?
Sure. Sure.
And that's
Sure.
what worries me, like as a coach going into trial for a player run roster. Um,
Yeah, that makes sense.
it could be like the
Um,
best. Like some of the best teams are player run rosters, by the way. Not saying player run rosters are bad or anything. It's like there's a lot of stuff that you don't know, which worries me, right?
yeah. I'm working on a video on that right now. The
Oh,
player
really?
run roster. I interviewed a couple of different people, but yeah. I think there's costs and benefits to it. Like I think having a team that's like getting players first, and then they come reach out to you, like you said, and ask for coaches. Like you already know, hopefully, about how good that team is right now. Do they assume they already like each other, like they want to be together, like they want this to work, and so you already have that side of the roster taken care of, obviously. But as you said, there is a risk that, of course, that is this somebody that are they going to have the hunger? But then again, that's why you trial. Like you're trialing them as much as they're trialing you.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
like it depends on the structure. So like if I was obviously Overwatch League, you have a staff structure, long like that's more important, and you find players that fit that. But I think, and even in contenders, like unless you're like a really really good coach, you would almost rather a player run team, like a
Hmm.
team that like a coach that like you can actually complement. Like I mean
Hmm.
that's most of the better contenders teams are player run, because you have the guarantee that those guys are like really motivated and really dedicated. But you as a coach also have to be very flexible. Like I know a lot of coaches that are very inexperienced or very stupid. Not stupid in terms of game, just in terms of like people skills, and they just smash their heads into the wall,
Yeah.
and that doesn't work. And so if you're going to like go player first, you have to know exactly like what you're getting into, because you
Yeah.
are you are literally a volunteer.
Yeah.
Like
I
you are
agree.
not big boss.
Yeah,
You are
and
not
like
big boss.
that's always what worries me, right? And like again, I agree. Player on rosters, the other thing that makes them really good is like you said, they want to be there. They know that they'll synergize together. Like
Yeah,
like they should know that like they'll work together, right? Like
yeah,
one of the things staff run rosters is you're hoping that the staff did a good job making the roster,
yeah,
right? And so
yeah,
there's always that hope there, right?
yeah.
And that could be something wrong that someone made a mistake, right? But it could be insane, right? It could be absolutely broken.
Yeah.
I think that there's that. Also, the reason why I say this, more player run rosters, in all honesty, there's just a lack of coaches.
Oh
But
yeah. Very
so
true.
I'm not gonna go too much into like managers and stuff, but yeah, like there's a lack of coaches, and like that really like affects stuff in my opinion.
Agreed.
So
Absolutely.
well, let me see if
Absolutely.
I can get another question here. Uh, what did you say about playstyles clashing when you're recruiting players? How can you explain that? You want to take this? Like
Um,
playstyles clashing when you're like
I mean,
trialing?
it's just like different ideas of like how to play a meta.
Mhm.
Which I think obviously as a coach you can kind of soothe that, but
Yep.
there's certain types of like there's different ways of like understanding a meta, and there's just different ways of playing it. Like I always like to say, like my like trope is like it doesn't matter if you play fast or slow. You can play fast with angles or you can play slow with angles. A lot of it just depends on like how you want to play it. Like you can pincer really like you could, for example, Reaper May. You could play like really slow or on like map control and like good cooldown trades and like take a good angle with your May and like your force cooldowns with your Reaper, and then your Ryan takes like a little bit more of aggressive push, but you like eventually you're just playing the resource war until something in the enemy team dies, or you could just harden with a Reaper TP, and like that can work too. Both can work. It just depends on how you play it. And like what are the players are more comfortable with. So like with clashing playstyles, it might be a personality thing where one person or one player prefers a playstyle, but it could also be that one player or person just is more comfortable with another playstyle. And then that's when you start to have issues. Like when initially with Chicken Contendies, like that team was a train wreck in a lot of ways, but it was like Gig on Ryan was a complete feeder, and it literally just let Harblue just do whatever he wanted in Zarya, basically. And so it kind of worked out. But if we'd had a Zarya that was like a little bit less greedy and a little bit more passive, then Gig would have died off of cooldown and nothing would have happened. So like, ultimately, like it kind of matched. Like it wasn't the best play style, but it worked because of that, like that circumstance.
No, absolutely. I agree. Like that's like a very, very good example. Hopefully that's a great example. Do you have any questions from your chat?
No.
All right. What is the best way to get noticed? I think we've sort of taught. Well, I'll be honest. Okay, so like I think like it's sort of crazy, but like I think content is actually like a great way to get noticed.
Yeah.
You may not get like an insane number of views, but I'll tell you right now, other coaches like notice if you're doing content. Now, whether they spend a lot of time watching your VODs is a different thing, but like they'll notice that like you're trying to like work on improving yourself or like stuff like that. I think and like again, networking we talked about, right? I don't know if you have other ones too besides trying to get noticed.
Yeah, I agree. Right. I think it's like making content that's like you have to find like content that's like a little bit separate as well. Like I'm a little guilty of this, but like the whole like Boston Uprising versus Paris Eternal analysis, like that's something I did recently and I had a lot of fun doing it, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to get like a lot of eyes on me. You know, it's like it's a little generic, so you have to be like more specific or like find a targeted like topic that you want to nail on. I think kind of like some of the stuff that you've been doing of like macro concepts and like how to grind with Hunter, like those are great videos. Like that's like a very targeted aspect and has a very clear topic, and I think that's something that like a lot of coaches can do to get noticed. But yeah, content is definitely helpful. It's unfortunate like that's something that we kind of not rely on, but it's something that a lot of coaches. I mean, it's what got me my first trial. Yeah.
I mean, it sucks, but like a lot of OWL teams look at like there's like a few OWL coaches I know in Korea just got picked off content actually because of like they did such good like content pieces that like they just like whoa, this guy's like really smart. So
interesting. That's neat.
I think it was like one was from NYXL.
Translate that stuff,
Yeah. One was from NYXL. I think even John Galt, I think like he was writing. He was like a Reddit person, right? And then from there he got picked up by contenders. So have you ever thought about coaching systems when you are looking for coaches, like delegating tasks, how much assistant coaches, basing your structure on top of top teams like Shock? I mean, sure, yeah. Like, I mean, like, I think we talked a lot about structure a little bit, like, and like how trial and coach is based off that. What I will say is like, I'm not gonna like a lot of like OWL structure is like very like kept under wraps unless like you know people and you talk to them. But like every team has their own structure because like I have it this way, structure is like a secret sauce, right? Like how a head coach runs his team, right? And like sort of like how he like goes about doing things and like doing things effectively is like essentially a secret sauce. So like and I think like a long time ago, I think me and you actually did a talk about structure. I think our team a while ago. So like, you can go watch that actually, and we talked about like our sort of secret sauce. I think. But
and it's just like you say, it's a team by team basis. Like what works with one team might not work with others. It's kind of like you just got trial and error. You find what's you're most comfortable with. Like even in professional sports, you have some coaches with wildly different structures and philosophies from other ones. And so it's like it just depends on the situation.
Okay. How many more questions do we have? Oh my god. How do you be? Is someone I work with? So you're gonna answer this. How do you be a leader? How do you be a leader in game without coming across as controlling or trying to micro your teammates?
Don't control or micro your teammates. That's how you do it.
There you go.
That's it. Like, don't do it. Like, if you be a leader by saying, "Come on, guys, we're gonna do this." Like, I really like. I want to. Like, can we grab this? Like, can we like grab Hanzo ult it? Like, you don't need to say, "Hey, Anna, can you buy it, grenade it?" hey, I'm, you know, Hanzo, I'm gonna need you to be Hanzo ulting from an angle so like Diva doesn't see it and eat it, or like, you know, Tracer, you're gonna need to like look for pressure behind, maybe like let them do their job. You call out what you're supposed to be doing, and that's it. And what you could do is you could inspire your teammates to take more responsibility in reviews and be like, hey, like what can we do to make this better? Um, but you need to take responsibility. Like one of the biggest things that I did with one team that I work with, the main support, who I wanted to have like more of an active leadership role, is I would have him ult track like as quickly and efficiently as possible, and all I'd have him say is, what are we doing? What do we do? That's all I had him say is, what do we do? He didn't have to tell like the planning or anything. He just asked a question. All right, guys, what are we doing? And that had such a huge impact on the team because it like inspired the other players to actually speak up. But he didn't say, all right, guys, we're doing this. All right, this is what our ult plan is, and start micromanaging. Like, don't do it. Just inspire, ask questions. You know, you could honestly, like, if you're like, if you're the, you know, main tank Ryan and you're getting tilted to your Ana, like not calling her nanos, you know, it'd be like, hey, like Ana, when do you want a nano me? Like, okay, do you want to call it or do you want me to call it? Like, just get that conversation started, but don't micro your teammates, because either they get irritated at you, or you lose focus on your own play, or you basically babysit them and they never actually properly learn how to call.
Yep.
Which
They
is
never
a big
learn.
issue.
Super important. Oh, I know it's been going on for a bit. I'll keep going and answer the questions in my chat. But yeah, I think like Spilo, like this has been awesome. We should try and do more of these regularly.
Yeah,
Definitely,
this is a lot of fun.
definitely a lot of fun.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
No, thank you too. I appreciate it, man. And anything else? Like any other topics or anything you think is important we missed or whatnot?
I mean, I think we got the topic. You don't want to go too on long, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think we nailed like what we wanted to get done. Again, thank you so much for having me on. Like, this was actually a really, really good idea. I was talking with my chat and I was like, this is stuff that I've like dabbled on here and there, but I've never like actually targeted as like a big one all stream, like one concept. I've always talked about, I like this in a player, I like this in a coach, but never like actually addressed the whole concept. So thank you so much.
Yeah. 100%. All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. I have your Twitter here. I'll also put your Twitch too. Let me find it. Oh, here
Appreciate
it. I'm gonna
exclamation mark guest in my chat, boys, for Natter stuff.
Make sure you guys go follow this dude. Follow. There's not a lot of good educational content out there. It's important. But yeah, thank you so much, Spilo. We'll definitely have to talk more soon. Okay.
Sure, mate. Appreciate it.
Yep. Bye.